Hi again, English 316 students. This is a discussion of participial and gerund phrases. It'll also touch on modification because that's an issue with phrases, right? So they modify other things in the sentence, and placement of them is sometimes important to the meaning. If it's not clear, or if the modifier is dangling, that is, it's not, there's the thing it's modifying actually isn't in the sentence, that can cause some problems. So I'm just gonna, again, use my trusty whiteboard, chalkboard thing. Okay, so when we're talking about participial phrases and gerunds, we're talking about participles. And participles are verb forms. The present participle ends in ing, and gerunds are always, I'm going to say, I think so, always present participles. Maybe I'll test that idea a little bit later. And participial phrases can be either beginning with a present participle or beginning with a past participle. Okay, but participles can do other things. So let's take a look at participles in action. Now, right, try to see them. Do you see word, and let me mention too, the past participles may be not ending in ed because they are irregular verbs. They may end in en, or they may be different than that altogether. So so the past participle is not quite as easy as it looks. I don't know if we'll deal with any of those in this discussion right now, but do know that if the past participle is irregular, whatever that past participle is still a participle. Okay, so let's eyeball these sentences, and I want you to look for the participle. These all come from Maya Angelou. I made myself a victim to an unwavering decision. Being a woman is hard work. Human beings are more alike than unalike. The American living in this vast country and able to traverse 3,000 miles east to west using the same language needs to hear languages as they collide in Europe, Africa, and Asia. All right, so see them? I'm just gonna go highlight them. There's one. I think they're all present participles. There's a kind of participle thing going on there. We'll talk about that momentarily. I noticed one that I'm not sure that I've noticed before, which is there. Okay. Right? Right? Those are all present participles, all of them, regardless of their part of speech. Right? Now this is where, nod and smile, yes, Nancy, I totally get this. Part of speech depends on the placement in the sentence, right? In the syntax. Okay, right? So let's look at the first one, unwavering, an unwavering decision, right? Are you figuring that out? What part of speech is it and why? Remember, what kind of word can come between an article? Sorry, I feel myself singing today. Lots of singing, and a noun, right? Remember? So there's a present participle acting as an adjective. Yeah, they can do that. Okay. What about this one? Actually, I'm going to highlight this whole thing. This whole thing is the subject of the verb. Maybe I should change my color coding here for a minute. This is the subject, so I'm going to make it a yellow so it fits with other nounish kinds of things, right? But it's still a present participle. And you'll notice I just gave it away, right? It's the subject of the sentence. So the present participle is part of a noun thing, and it has an object, right? A woman. So being a woman is, right? That's the subject. So it's something called a gerund, right? A gerund is a participial phrase acting as a noun, right? So we've seen noun clauses that have acted as nouns. Now we're seeing some types of noun phrases, a gerund, and I think you read that in Morenberg last week, right? So noun phrases, that's one of them. It begins with a present participle. Okay, here, I don't know, I think this is kind of a compound word. And again, it's not a participle, it's the noun or the subject of the sentence, right? So here's another kind of participial looking thing that's actually acting as a noun. I don't know that I'd call it a gerund, right? Because it's not really a phrase, but it is a participle acting as a noun. And human is either a compound noun or an adjective. Okay, so human beings. All right, nod and smile. Okay, with me so far? All right. So then the other thing that participles can do is they can be the beginning of participial phrases. And participial phrases act as adjectives or modifiers, right? This is a whole really long, the whole thing here. The whole thing that's parenthetical, made parenthetical by the commas around it, that is a non-restrictive element, right? Remember that vocabulary. It's an element that's not vital to the meaning of the sentence, so it's set off kind of parenthetically with commas. And the whole thing is a participial phrase, which has another participial phrase sort of inside it. Okay, right? And the participial phrase is modifying the American living in this vast country and able to traverse 3,000 miles east to west using the same language, right? That's acting as an adverb describing, right, the ability to, is that right? Is to traverse, right? Using these same language, right? Okay, so we've got a participial phrase acting as an adjective. We've got a participial phrase, I think, modifying traverse, acting as an adjective. Adverb. All right, that's the harder part. And once you get used to finding participles, that's good, but that's not enough. You have to be able to distinguish whether it's the beginning of a participial phrase and not, there's one other piece that's missing here, I'm realizing, right? Okay, not a noun, not an adjective, and not a verb. Let me add another one. Her courage, no, that's not gonna work. The branches, I don't know if this is gonna make sense, are waving. Maybe that's a good enough similar word, right? So sometimes, notice we've got another present participle, right? So the branches are waving. That whole thing is the verb, right? The branches is the subject, are waving is the verb in the breeze. So participles can also be part of the verb. Let me give you an example with a past participle. Right? Also, got a helping verb there. Yeah. Okay. So had waved, past participle. Good. Okay. So non-smile, right? Those are all the parts of speech that participles can be. And now let's see if we can work with participial phrases first. All right. Right. So here are some. And let's figure out which are the participial phrases and which are the gerunds. This sentence came right out of Angelou, right? So she's already using this stuff probably without thinking about it, but it's a really good example for a grammar class because it has both types. So I'm going to read it and I want you to think, right? First, look for the participles, see them, and then try to think which part of speech they are enacting. A tourist browsing in a Paris shop, eating in an Italian ristorante, or idling along a Hong Kong street will encounter 3 or 4 languages as she negotiates the buying of a blouse, the paying of a check, or the choosing of a trinket. All right, I'm going to highlight all these. I'll use my green because they're kind of verbish, right? You saw these, nod and smile. Yes, I did. You caught those as I was reading, right? Yes, yes, I did, Nancy. Okay, here's some more. Woohoo, look at that. Right? Okay, great. We've got 6 participles, present participles. Now, which of them are participial phrases and which of them are gerund phrases? Okay, You'll notice that they're parallel, right? So you could do this. You could bullet them all just for fun, right? Let's unbullet that. Again, I'm just playing around so we can see things. Let's bullet these. They are parallel. They have the same grammatical structure, which gives us a clue. Nod and smile, right? What kind of word can come after an article? Oh, well, if you can have an adjective between it, but usually a noun, right? Article, adjective, noun, or article, noun, which means these are what? Gerunds, yay, right? Because they're all following the article the. Great. Which means by process of elimination, these are participial phrases, but notice, right, they're offset with commas, right? We have that, again, a non-restrictive element. It is unnecessary to the meaning of the sentence. It is set off with commas from the rest, and it's got these parallel participial phrases, and they're all describing tourists. They're acting as adjective modifiers, modifying tourists. Great, right? Get it? Oh, yay, I knew you would. Okay, let's fiddle some more. Let's just figure these ones out, right? Can you eyeball them? Simply overhearing a foreign tongue may not add to one's understanding of that language. Okay, I do know, however, that being exposed to the existence of other languages increases the perception that the world is populated by people who not only speak differently from oneself, but whose cultures and philosophies are other than one's own. Right? Did you see them? Again, let's highlight. Right, there's one. Simply overhearing a foreign tongue might not add to one's understanding. Right? Okay. So, how do you know what part of speech these are? Simply overhearing a foreign tongue may not add. All right, there's the verb, which means this participial phrase, I guess maybe I'll underline it instead of making it all yellow, right? This participial phrase is acting as the subject of may not add, the verb, okay? So what does that mean? If it's a subject, what part of speech is it? It's a noun, which means it's a gerund, right? Yeah, right. We remember that vocabulary. Okay, good. Okay, look at this understanding of that language, right? One's is a possessive. It is acting as an adjective, which means it's coming before a noun. Right? So understanding is also a gerund. Woo! Okay, let's do one more set. There's the participle, being exposed. There's also a past participle there. That's interesting. Right, so we've got kind of like a helping verb thing going on there. Increases perception that the world is populated. There's a past participle. I think those are all. Okay, so, all right. How do we figure these ones out? All right, well, let's see. Right, we can say, of course, that we've got a main clause there. And so this stuff is all part of a noun clause, which means, right, there's the that's not a relative pronoun, but kind of like a relative pronoun. We've got our subject and verb here in the main clause. Okay, and then we've got the beginning of the noun clause. So this, I'm going to try to find the verb. That being exposed to the existence of other languages increases. There's the verb in the noun clause. Let me just move this around here so I can separate it. Okay. This, all of this underlined part is the subject of the verb increases. So we've got a gerundish thing going on there, right? Being exposed as a gerund, in this case, increases the perception that Okay, we've got now our relative clause, modifying perception. And here's our verb. Look, our verb is populated. That means the past participle is part of the verb in this case. It's not a participial phrase and it's not a gerund. Oh, right? All right. I'm gonna do, let's do past participles, right? The giver as enriched, the giver, so watch for the past participles. The giver is as enriched as is the recipient, and more important, that intangible but very real psychic force of good in the world is increased, right? So we've got ed, whoops, that was not what I wanted to do. Let's do this. Ed verb and ed verb, past participles, is as enriched, as enriched. There's the verb. And this is, okay, well, I'm pretty sure, look at that, right? We have it's a little bit different structure, right? The good in the world, that's the subject of is increased. That's a force of good in the world, the very real, oh, this whole thing is the subject, but more important, that intangible, right? Okay, we've got two clauses. All right, back it up. That intangible but very real psychic force of good in the world, that whole thing is the subject of is increased. So we know what that past participle is doing. It is part of the verb. Okay, this one is different. This is acting as an adjective. Giver is as enriched as is the recipient. So enriched is acting as an adjective describing the giver, I think. Okay. All right, well, that's as good as it gets there. Let's do one other thing. We'll keep working on that stuff. We're going to talk about modification, which has to do with placement of modifiers or things that are acting as adjectives or adverbs. Okay, I want to say one thing about this thing called a limiting modifier. And that is that limiting modifiers belong right before the nouns they modify. So notice, usually we say this is what we would say in conversation, right? I only read good literature. But that means that I only read good literature. That's all I read, right? That I only read. So that only is modifying read, which means I only read. I don't do other things. Here, if you really want to say that all I read is good literature, the only has to come before good literature. So placement can change the meaning. Okay, let's take a look at this modification issue when it is using participial phrases. Well, it'll come up with the other ones, but it's interesting with participial phrases sometimes, especially because sometimes they can be misplaced and sometimes they can be dangling. Okay. There are dogs and people standing in the dog park sniffing each other. I like that one, right? Well, maybe we're all sniffing each other, but who's really doing the sniffing? I think maybe people won't admit it, but I'm going to move that, right? That's a misplaced. Moving it right after dogs. They're the ones doing the sniffing, not the people, because they have the noses to do that, right? So that's a misplaced modifier. Okay, right? And let's look at some of these things. Let's look at the placement of the modifier, right? So I took it out of its original location, which was here, the second example, and I put it at the end of the sentence. Let's see what that does. The American needs to hear languages as they collide in Europe, Africa, and Asia, living in this vast country and able to traverse 3,000 miles east to west using the same language. That's harder to process because the participial phrase is too far away from the noun it modifies, right? So that's a misplaced. This is good. It follows the noun, just like we did here with sniffing each other. But you could also put a participial phrase at the beginning of the sentence, right? Living in this vast country and able to traverse 3,000 miles east to west using the same language, the American needs to hear languages, right? So that's fine, right? As long as it's right before or after. Okay, here's an example of, I think you'll notice, a dangling. It is important to hear languages as they collide in Europe, Africa, and Asia, living in this vast country and able to traverse 3,000 miles east to west using the same language. That's a dangler, right? Because the person doing the living is not in the sentence. All right, that's about it. I'll shut up now. Then let's just play, right? Now you can do the inductive exercise, fool around with your understanding of participles and the placement of them. Have a great week.